Right now, somewhere in the world, a dog is pressing its body against a person who is crying. Not because it was trained to do that. Not because it wants food or a walk. Just because something, some ancient, wordless signal, pulled it closer. And if you've ever had an animal do that to you, sit with you in your worst moment, rest its head on your lap when you hadn't said a single word, you already know the feeling. But the question that keeps scientists up at night isn't whether it happens, it's why. And more precisely, what does the animal actually know about what you're feeling? That's the open door this video walks through. Because the answer, when you follow the science all the way to the end, is stranger and more beautiful than you might expect. Let's start with something simple. You've probably noticed that animals react when you're upset. Your dog gets closer. Your cat changes its behavior. Even animals that don't live with you, horses, elephants, certain primates, seem to pick up on something when a human is distressed. For a long time, scientists called this stress contagion, a kind of emotional mirroring so basic it barely qualified as feeling. But that framing has been quietly falling apart for years. The first serious crack appeared in studies on domestic dogs. In 2012, researchers at the University of London, led by Deborah Custance and Jennifer Mayer, ran an experiment where people either cried, hummed, or talked in a neutral tone while a dog was present. The dogs approached crying individuals significantly more than humming or neutral talking ones, and they approached in a submissive, comforting posture, not out of curiosity or alarm. They weren't confused or frightened. They oriented toward the emotional signal with something that looked unmistakably like concern. What that study couldn't tell us, and what makes this question so slippery, is whether the dog understood what sadness is. Whether there's a concept behind the response, or whether the animal is simply pulled by an emotional gravity it doesn't name but genuinely feels. And here's the thing, that distinction might matter less than we think, because even in humans, most emotional response happens before language catches up. If you find yourself coming back to questions like this, what animals actually experience, what they know about us, whether the connection is real, this channel exists for exactly that. Every video goes deeper into the inner life of animals and the bond they form with us. Subscribing keeps you in that conversation. So let's go deeper into the mechanism. How does an animal read a human's emotional state? The answer starts in the nose. Dogs have roughly 300 million olfactory receptors, compared to about 6 million in humans. They can detect changes in your cortisol levels, a hormone released under stress, directly from your breath and skin. A 2019 study, published in PLOS One by researchers at Queen's University Belfast, led by Clara Wilson, demonstrated that dogs could identify stress-related breath and sweat samples with an accuracy of around 93.75%. They weren't reading your face, they were reading your chemistry. But that's only part of the picture. Because animals don't just detect stress, they respond to it differently depending on who you are to them. Studies on dogs have shown that they respond more strongly to the distress of their owners than to strangers. There's something happening beyond species-wide signal detection. There's something that looks like attachment, like your specific sadness, meaning something specific to them. Frans de Waal, the primatologist who spent decades documenting the emotional lives of primates, described what he called targeted helping. The observation that chimpanzees and bonobos will comfort individuals who are distressed, seeking them out, touching them, staying close. And crucially, they do this more with individuals they are bonded to. It's not random empathy broadcast in all directions. It's something directed, personal. De Waal argued that the roots of human empathy are visible in our primate relatives, and that the capacity to feel affected by another's suffering is far older than our species. Now, here's where it gets strange. Because the question isn't just whether animals detect your sadness. It's whether they understand what sadness is, whether they have any model of you as an entity with an inner life. And that question leads you somewhere much harder. In 1970, psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. developed the mirror self-recognition test. The idea being that if an animal recognizes itself in a mirror, it possesses some form of self-awareness. Great apes past, elephants past, dolphins past. Even certain corvids showed evidence of it. What the test suggests is that some animals carry a mental model of themselves as a distinct entity in the world. And if you have a model of yourself, the argument goes, you're capable of modeling others, of recognizing that there is a them out there with their own inner experience. This is called theory of mind, and it's the cognitive door behind which empathy, as we understand it, actually lives. You can think about what this means. Have you ever looked at your dog or your cat and wondered whether, behind those eyes, there's a sense of you as a person, not just a food source or a safe presence, but a being with moods, needs, and bad days? That's not a sentimental question. It's one researchers have been trying to answer with real experiments for decades. We'd love to know your experience. If you've ever had an animal respond to you when you were sad in a way that felt like it really understood, tell us in the comments. What happened? What did it feel like? Those moments are exactly what this channel is built around. The evidence for theory of mind in animals is complex and contested, but it's real. A 2016 study published in Current Biology by researchers at Kyoto University showed that dogs use what scientists call referential looking. They alternate their gaze between a human and a hidden object to communicate, the same cognitive strategy human infants use before they have words. They're not just reacting to you, they're trying to tell you something. They're treating you as a mind that can be informed. And horses. Consider what researchers have found in horses. A 2016 study published in Biology Letters by Amy Smith and Karen McComb at the University of Sussex showed that horses could distinguish between photographs of happy and angry human faces, and that they had a measurably different physiological and behavioral response to each. When shown angry faces, their heart rate increased, and they turned to look with their left eye, a behavior associated in many mammals with processing threatening stimuli via the right brain hemisphere. They weren't just seeing a face. They were reading a social signal and preparing a response. What makes this extraordinary is that humans are not horses' species. They didn't evolve to read our faces. At some point in the long shared history between humans and certain animals, they developed the capacity to interpret our emotional expressions because it was useful, because it was necessary, because we were part of each other's worlds. That's not a small thing, but it's the cases, the specific, documented, named stories that make the science feel like it's about something real. Let's talk about one that researchers still reference when they want to talk about animal grief and emotional awareness. In 2018, a female orca known as Tahlequah, scientifically designated J35, lost her newborn calf. She carried the dead calf on her rostrum on her head for 17 days across more than 1,000 miles of ocean. Her pod slowed for her. Members took turns helping to keep the calf's body afloat. Marine biologists who had never used the word grief in a scientific paper began using it, because there was no other word. What that behavior tells us beyond grief is that Tahlequah knew something was wrong, that she had an expectation of life that was violated, that the loss mattered in a way that lasted. And when you set that image next to the question of whether animals know when a human is sad, it shifts the frame entirely. It's not that they're detecting a signal and producing a behavior. Some of them are living in an emotional world with stakes, and we are part of that world. This is the part science still can't fully explain. Because if animals grieve, if they comfort, if they read our chemistry in our faces and our body language, if they respond to our sadness, not just as a stimulus, but as something that moves them, then the question of what's happening inside them becomes both urgent and humbling. Thomas Nagel wrote in his 1974 essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" that there is something it is like to be a bat, a subjective experience that we cannot access from the outside. The same question applies to every animal that has ever sat with you in a hard moment. You cannot get inside, but the evidence keeps suggesting there's something in there worth finding. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by a group of prominent neuroscientists, stated that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. That's not a fringe position. That's a scientific consensus document. And it means that when your dog presses against you while you cry, it may not be performing comfort. It may be feeling something closer to what comfort actually is. Here's where the story lands. There's a chimpanzee named Washoe, born around 1965, who became the first non-human animal to learn American Sign Language. Washoe learned over 350 signs and, crucially, used them spontaneously and creatively, not just to request things, but to comment, to name, to describe. When researcher Kat Carter, who had been away for a period after suffering a miscarriage, returned to work, Washoe looked at her and signed, "Cry." She wasn't sad herself. She was describing what she perceived in Kat, a sadness Kat hadn't announced, hadn't explained, had tried, perhaps, to contain. Washoe saw it anyway. That moment, one chimpanzee, one human, one sign is what the entire science points toward. Not that animals understand sadness the way you do, with all the language and narrative you wrap around it, but that they perceive something real in you. that your emotional state is not invisible to them, that the bond, whatever it is, runs in both directions. So, when you ask whether animals know when a human is sad, the answer the science builds toward is this: they know something. They read it in your chemistry before you speak. They read it in your face, in your posture, and the quality of your stillness. The ones bonded to you feel it differently than they feel it in a stranger. And some of them, the ones whose inner lives have been studied most carefully, respond not just with behavior, but with what looks, from every angle we can measure, like care. You will never be able to prove what a dog feels when it lies against you while you cry. That gap between the behavior and the inner life is where Nagel's question lives, and it may never fully close. But here's what you can sit with. Across dozens of species, across decades of careful research, the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction. The animal beside you is not indifferent to your pain. It is, in some sense, that science is still learning to measure with you in it. That's not a small thing to know. If this made you see the animals in your life differently, or if it reminded you of a moment you've never quite forgotten, please leave a like. It genuinely helps other people find this content. And if you know someone who has ever been comforted by an animal, share this with them. Because some questions are better asked together.